Hello and welcome back to English 75A. I'm your host, Sean Connelly. If you like what you're seeing and you'd like to follow me telepathically, just go up to the upper left-hand corner of your mutant gene and click follow. Today we'll be talking about Mary Rowlandson's narrative of the Captivity and Restoration. I've got the discussion post topic listed right here. There are a lot of different themes going on in this work here, and we'll be talking about the importance of the genre in just a minute. But notions of colonial womanhood, Native American life and sociology, politics and practices of empire, providence, religion, relationship between natives and Puritans, all of this is wrapped up in the narrative. And it's going to say some explicit things about it, but it's also going to make certain suggestions and implications as well. So what do we need to know about Mary Rowlandson? She was born circa, that means roughly, 1636, died 1711. So that's about 70 some odd years or so, which is quite a long time there. This actual frontispiece was borrowed from another work about a woman who was a colonist, but also some kind of hunter or soldier. But they reused it. I don't know why. It looks like we've got a fort there in the background too. What we need to know about her. She was the wife of a minister, and she was living in Lancaster, about 30 miles just to the west of Boston. So here we are in the heart of New England. And in 1676, she was kidnapped by Wampanoag Native Americans. And this was a result of King Philip's War that was occurring during the time. King Philip is, of course, the anglicized name given to the local Wampanoag chief, which is Metacomet. She was held in captivity for 11 straight weeks. Now, she wasn't killed, but many people who were close to her were when her town was raided during these extended conflicts. These conflicts were the result of the English settlements increasingly encroaching upon the Wampanoag lands. And, breakdown after breakdown of treaty and agreement between these two groups. Now, she is the author of the narrative of the Captivity and Restoration, published in 1682 and became one of the most popular texts in the New World and in Europe. There was a lot of curiosity about Native Americans, or Indians as they called them, and what they were like. So this is one of those groundbreaking texts. In fact, by some accounts, some literary critics will call it America's first number one bestseller. It was that popular. People couldn't get enough of it. And it really is the starting point for what we will now call the captivity narrative. And there are lots of different iterations of that narrative. In other words, someone who was kidnapped or absconded by natives and having to live with them for a period of time. Here we have a title page from the book. Here we see Mary Rowlandson. Again, she's holding a rifle, and she was not actually a soldier, or as far as we know, had any kind of skill in those particular martial activities, but got to put something on the cover, I guess. And this is from a 1773 edition. And it looks like she's defending herself against like an army of George Washingtons. Oh, what are you going to do? You can't get the best artist in the New World. But you can notice what it says here underneath that illustration: who was taken prisoner, there's those S's that look like F's, by the Indians with several others, and treated in the most barbarous and cruel manner by those vile savages, with many other remarkable events during her travels. They're really pulping it up here. You know what? it could have been a lot worse for her. It could have been a lot more barbarous. There were certainly atrocities on both sides, and she lived to tell the tale. So, how bad was it? Now, she wrote this 6 years after she was finally released back to the colonies, and there were a couple different attempts to pay a ransom in order to free her. Finally, one of those did happen, and she was given back to the colonists to the tune of 20 British pounds sterling, which in today's dollars is probably around $4,300 or something like that. So it's a little bit of a ransom. That's the long and the short of it. Now, there's some speculation too that she had a bit of help writing this by Cotton Mather, at least in the preface, and you got to wonder about how much of this really is a truthful and accurate retelling, given that she's writing this 6 years after she returned. And there was a detail from that front page, and yeah, looks like George Washington to me. I don't know, maybe that's just me. All right. And again, speaking to the testament of this, here is a much better engraving from a later edition, and you can see the natives looking more like natives, and Mary Rowlandson right in there with a couple of her children, one of which actually died. She was injured during the conflict. So there was lots of heartbreak on both sides. Now, there are a series of removes that we'll be looking at throughout the reading, and you'll notice the first one starts in Lancaster, and it kind of traces it through the contemporary county lines as we see it, and there are roughly 20 of them. They traveled quite a bit. The natives were traveling to stay ahead of the colonials who were fighting them, and also to plan later attacks. Now, as you read through this, I want you to look at a couple things. I want you to look at where she uses the term providence, God's idea of protection, to help explain how she is keeping alive and staying somewhat protected within the Wampanoag people. She also does use biblical verses and even puts them in separate text apart from paragraphs to give them more emphasis. Now, we saw that with John Smith as well, and doesn't really have the same kind of bell ringing effect for him than it does for Rowlandson. You do get a very strong sense of her piety. What I'd also like you to pay attention to is the way in which she talks about interactions between her and the natives. Her adjustment to this new life changes. And when she gets more incorporated into the tribe, she realizes, that there were a lot of things in her life that she took for granted, and that she became a newer and humbler person on the other side of it. There's some very excellent passages about the type of food that she had to eat and how she couldn't handle them at first. But then after that, she gained a new appreciation. There will also be some very interesting passages for you to look at, which include her interacting with other members of the tribe, trading skills and goods in order to get more meat, other basic supplies, and the relationship she actually developed with the local chief's wife highlight some of those interactions. She also talks about how the natives treated each other, rather, and those parts will be worth your notes as well. Now, one of the other important religious notions that gets explored in Mary Rowlandson's narrative is the idea of God's will, or theodicy. That's Theodicy. And that's basically the question of how God can allow good things to happen to bad people if he really is all powerful and all knowing. Why would he do that? And so those are important explorations for her to deal with as she's trying to get through this pretty long event here. We're talking about almost 3 months of her life. I'd also like you to pay attention and to track the changes that Rowlandson undergoes throughout the journey. She's a Puritan woman with a very limited scale and very limited understanding about how a lot of other regions and peoples of the world work. But she starts to learn quite rapidly a different kind of perspective for the world. The other thing I would like you to think about too is the way in which her understanding of the world is not only evolving in relationship to the Native Americans, but also in relationship to their cultural practices, their values system, and for their sense of in-group identity. There's so much that she has to share about this experience, and it'll be important for us to take a look at those changes, those arcs that are occurring over the course of the reading. The last thing that I'll have you think about is this. Towards the end, she expresses a certain amount of gratitude that what happened to her. As challenging as it was, it fits into this larger notion of God's plan. And that comes back to this idea that I'll explore a little bit more later on, called the happy fall. In Latin, it's called the Felix Culpa, Felixculpa. Now, what that basically means is that something bad has to happen going down in order to get you to a higher place on the other side. And this is a very old idea. It goes all the way back to the Old Testament. The idea of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They had to leave the Garden of Eden. They had to fall into death and to sin and to pain in order to finally have that chance to be in God's presence afterwards. That's the belief. Another way of looking at it too is that Jesus also had to die and to suffer in order for him to fulfill his role as God the Son, and also to allow humans to be able to be in presence of God as well. So something really bad has to happen in order to get you to that better place that's even higher than that starting place afterwards. So look for that as well. Stay tuned. I've got more videos coming. Until then, I'll see you later.